what should I keep in mind when training people from a culture different from my own? So when I'm delivering a workshop to introduce people to MBTI or any other kind of training cross-culturally, what things would be important? I think the top one I would have on the list is to be very aware of your own type and cultural biases. That, type is a filter through which we see the world and that can influence, the way that we observe and understand others, and also your own culture. That you need to raise awareness of that as to what your natural expectations might be and to be able to step outside of that. One particular tip would be when you're using type descriptions to be careful you're not using them as stereotypes. So, for example, you might have a description of an ISTJ and lots of examples and think, oh, yeah, I know what an ISTJ looks like. But remember, you've only seen an ISTJ in your culture or the cultures that you've been exposed to. Yeah, so remember that type is not about the behavioral description. It's about the underlying preferences. So what people will have in common with ISTJ is that natural underlying preference, but it may be expressed behaviorally in different ways. So an ISTJ in a different culture may show up slightly differently because of the different cultural expectations, even though they still have the underlying preferences. Other things that are perhaps important to be aware of. So things like structure and timing. So the example I mentioned earlier about the 8 a.m. start didn't work in some cultures. Also, the amount of time you leave for lunch breaks, the amount of hours you expect people to engage in the process. Also pacing and energy levels. Yeah, so I think in the West, we tend to have quite pacey, quite quick training sessions. Other cultures may prefer a much slower pace, be given much more time to reflect, to be able to engage with the information. Other things to be aware of. So I mentioned earlier that difference potentially with comfort with disclosure and sharing. I think often we run type workshops and we encourage people to share examples to aid the learning. In some cultures, that might be seen as inappropriate to ask for that level of sharing. As I mentioned earlier, attitudes to authority. So the extent to which people are going to question and challenge you. But the other side of it, the extent to which people might just accept exactly what you say when you might want to have some challenge. So an example I have here is of a US trainer who trained in Singapore. And at the end of the training, they said, that was a great training, but they were worried about, did she really know her stuff? Because she asked them lots of questions, because she was wanting them to engage and discuss the content rather than just deliver it. Finally, the attitudes to individualism, which I mentioned earlier, again, that this could influence the extent to which people want to highlight their own differences, want to highlight their own uniqueness, as opposed to presenting who they are within a cultural context. So those are some things to be aware of. So I hope you've enjoyed our tour through questions around culture, and I hope you found that useful, and wish you all the best with your training courses, wherever they might happen.